She will forget what you said. She will forget what you wore. But there are a few things a woman's nervous system never forgets about a man, and once you do them, you live there forever. I'm going to tell you something most men are never taught, and many women never say out loud. As a psychologist who has listened to thousands of women talk when no man was in the room, I can tell you this with absolute certainty. Women do not remember men logically. They remember them emotionally, and the men they never forget are not the loudest, the richest, or the most dominant. They're the ones who made her feel a very specific way at a very specific moment in her life. Most men think attraction is created through effort, more texting, more explaining, more proving, more chasing. But what actually creates imprint is presence, emotional presence. When a woman senses that a man is fully there, not performing, not angling for approval, not trying to extract something from her, her brain flags him as different. Safe, but not boring. Grounded, but not needy. Rare. Women never forget a man who stays calm when she is emotionally charged, when she's overwhelmed, stressed, unsure, or even slightly testing you without realizing it, and you don't react defensively or try to fix her emotions. You don't interrupt. You don't minimize. You don't turn it into a debate. You simply hold your frame and let her feel what she feels. To a woman, that registers as strength, not loud strength, not aggressive strength, but regulated strength, the kind her body relaxes around. Her nervous system learns your rhythm, and once that happens, you're not just a memory, you're a reference point. Women never forget a man who sees them clearly without trying to own them. This is important. When a man notices her patterns, her moods, her contradictions, and doesn't shame her for them or try to control them, she feels deeply understood. And understanding is more intoxicating than compliments. You can tell a woman she's beautiful 1,000 times and be forgotten. But if you quietly recognize when she's pulling away because she's scared, not because she doesn't care, and you don't punish her for it, that moment stays with her for years. There's also something else most men miss. Women never forget a man who doesn't rush emotional intimacy, but also doesn't avoid it. If you've ever wondered why a woman still talks about a man from her past who didn't do that much, it's because he made space instead of pressure. He didn't force labels. He didn't interrogate her feelings. He let connection unfold at its own pace. That creates safety, and safety is what allows desire to deepen instead of burn out. From a psychological perspective, memory is encoded most strongly during moments of emotional contrast. When a woman expects you to react one way and you react another, you stand out. When she expects defensiveness and gets calm, when she expects withdrawal and gets steadiness, when she expects manipulation and gets honesty, those moments become anchors in her mind. This is why women forget men who try too hard to be impressive. Performance doesn't imprint. Authentic regulation does. A woman may leave, move on, even love someone else, but the man who treated her emotions with respect, who didn't abandon himself or her under pressure, becomes a silent benchmark. Consciously or not, she compares future men to how she felt around you. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Women don't forget men who made them feel emotionally safe and emotionally awake. Not numbed, not anxious, awake, seen, grounded. If you understand this, truly understand it, you stop trying to be unforgettable. You simply become it. Women never forget a man who knows when to step closer and when to step back. This is where most men lose their power without realizing it. They think consistency means constant availability. It doesn't. Psychological safety is not built by always being there. It's built by being solid when you are there and unshaken when you're not. A woman's mind is always scanning for emotional leadership, not control, leadership. Can this man hold himself when things are unclear? Can he tolerate uncertainty without becoming anxious, clingy, or cold? When a man doesn't collapse during emotional ambiguity, her subconscious marks him as high value, not socially, biologically. Women never forget a man who doesn't punish them for honesty. If she admits confusion, fear, attraction, or even doubt, and you don't withdraw affection or attack her character, something locks in. Most men say they want honesty, but when it arrives, they react emotionally. They sulk, they pressure, they try to negotiate attraction. That teaches her to hide parts of herself. But the man who allows truth without consequence becomes unforgettable because he gave her something rare, freedom without abandonment. There's also the matter of emotional restraint. This is misunderstood. Emotional restraint doesn't mean emotional absence. It means you don't dump your unresolved feelings onto her and call it vulnerability. A woman never forgets a man who can share his inner world without asking her to manage it. When you speak from clarity instead of chaos, she feels invited, not burdened. Her nervous system relaxes, and relaxed nervous systems bond deeply. From a psychological standpoint, women form lasting emotional memories around men who represent emotional contrast to their past experiences. If she's known volatility, you feel grounding. If she's known emotional distance, you feel present. If she's known inconsistency, you feel reliable. This contrast creates imprinting. You become the exception, and exceptions are remembered far longer than patterns. Women also never forget a man who respects boundaries without resentment. When you accept a boundary calmly, without trying to bypass it, test it, or guilt her, she learns that you are safe with power. This is crucial. Power without safety is threatening. Safety without power is forgettable. The man who balances both becomes significant. Another truth men rarely hear: women never forget how a man leaves a moment, not just relationships, moments, a conversation, a disagreement, a pause in communication. If you leave with dignity, without emotional manipulation or dramatics, that ending echoes. Even if the connection fades, the memory of how you handled distance remains intact. It tells her who you are at your core. This is why disappearing in anger damages attraction, but stepping back with self-respect often deepens it. One feels reactive, the other feels intentional. Women are extraordinarily sensitive to intention. They feel it before they can explain it. When a woman says, "I don't know why I still think about him," what she's really saying is, "My body remembers how I felt around him." Emotional memory bypasses logic. It lives in tone, pacing, and energy. And men who master emotional pacing, who don't rush, don't retreat impulsively, and don't overstay, become imprinted. You don't need to chase to be remembered, you need to be anchored. Women never forget a man who doesn't need them, but chooses them. This distinction lives deep in female psychology, far below words. Need feels heavy, choice feels powerful. When a woman senses that your life is full, your identity intact, and your emotional state stable without her validation, something shifts. You stop being a role she fills and become a presence she wants. A man who doesn't orbit her moods becomes unforgettable. If her energy dips and you don't scramble, if she pulls back and you don't chase, if she tests unconsciously and you don't react emotionally, not because you're detached, but because you're grounded. This signals emotional maturity. And emotional maturity is deeply attractive to women, especially as they age and become tired of chaos disguised as passion. Women also never forget a man who allows silence without anxiety. Silence terrifies insecure men. They rush to fill it with explanations, jokes, reassurance, or questions. But silence, when held calmly, creates tension. And tension is where attraction lives. A man who can sit in silence, who doesn't perform for connection, tells her something without saying a word. "I'm comfortable with myself." That comfort transfers to her body, and bodies remember comfort. There is another layer most men never consider: emotional consistency over time. Not excitement, not intensity, consistency. A woman may feel fireworks with many men. She forgets most of them. But the man whose emotional temperature doesn't spike and crash becomes a reference for stability. And stability, when paired with depth, creates attachment that lasts long after proximity ends. Women never forget a man who speaks truth without cruelty. Honesty delivered calmly, without the need to dominate or win, lands differently. If you tell her how you feel without blaming her, without framing yourself as the victim, without pressuring her response, she experiences emotional respect. That moment often stays with her longer than passionate gestures ever could. From a psychological angle, the men women remember are often the ones who didn't try to lock them down emotionally. Attachment that forms freely bonds stronger than attachment formed under pressure. When a woman realizes she chose to care rather than being cornered into it, her memory of you carries dignity, not regret. Women also never forget men who don't flinch at their complexity. Contradictions, changing emotions, vulnerability followed by distance. These are not flaws, they're human patterns. When you don't pathologize her emotions or label her as too much, she feels accepted without being reduced. Acceptance is rare. Rare things are remembered. And here's a truth that cuts deep. Women don't forget men who didn't try to be unforgettable. They forget the performers. They remember the men who were real, regulated, and self-respecting. The ones who didn't chase intensity, but allowed depth. Years later, she might not remember the dates, the texts, or even the timeline clearly, but she will remember how safe she felt expressing herself, how steady you were when things were uncertain, how you didn't abandon yourself to keep her, or abandon her to protect your ego. Those men become emotional landmarks, quiet, powerful, permanent. Women never forget a man who walked away without bitterness. This may be the most powerful imprint of all. When a connection ends and a man doesn't collapse, lash out, beg, or rewrite history to protect his ego, something profound happens in her psychology. You leave behind dignity, and dignity lingers. Most men think staying is what makes them memorable. Often, it's how you leave. When you accept reality without resentment, when you don't punish her for choosing differently, when you don't try to make her regret you, you become the man who handled loss with strength. That is rare, and rarity burns into memory. A woman's mind replays moments where a man showed emotional self-respect under pressure. Not bravado, not indifference. Self-respect. If you said calmly, "I care, but this doesn't align with what I want," and you meant it, that sentence echoes far longer than dramatic declarations of love. It tells her you value connection, but not at the cost of yourself. Women never forget men who didn't try to own their future. If you allowed her freedom without withdrawing warmth, she associates you with autonomy, not confinement. Psychologically, this matters more than men realize. The brain resists control but bonds to choice. You become associated with expansion, not limitation. And the mind returns to places where it felt expanded. There's also the matter of emotional integrity. Women never forget men whose words and actions matched. If you were consistent even when it wasn't convenient, if you didn't promise what you couldn't sustain, your memory remains clean. No confusion, no emotional debris. Clean memories last. Messy ones get buried. From a clinical perspective, unresolved emotional experiences replay themselves. That's why men who create emotional chaos are remembered, but not longed for. Men who create emotional clarity are remembered with respect, sometimes even with regret. Respect is quieter than obsession, but it lasts longer. Women also never forget men who saw them at a turning point in their life. When a woman is evolving, leaving an old identity, questioning patterns, waking up emotionally, the man who witnesses her without trying to steer her becomes symbolic. You're no longer just a man from her past. You represent a chapter, and chapters don't disappear. Here's the truth that many men find uncomfortable. Being unforgettable doesn't guarantee she stays. It means you mattered. And that matters more than winning someone who didn't choose you fully. Men who understand this stop trying to control outcomes and start focusing on alignment. And alignment is magnetic. Women don't forget men who didn't abandon their values for attachment. If you stayed kind but firm, open but grounded, warm but self-directed, you demonstrated something most men never do. You showed her what emotional adulthood looks like. Even if she wasn't ready to meet you there, her mind remembers. Years later, when relationships fail, when patterns repeat, when attraction fades faster than it should, a woman often thinks back to the man who felt different. Not louder, not flashier, different. And difference rooted in emotional maturity leaves a permanent mark. So if you're trying to be unforgettable, stop trying to be impressive. Be regulated, be honest, be self-respecting, be present, and be willing to walk away without hardening your heart. Now let me ask you something personal and answer honestly in the comments. Were you ever the man who stayed true to himself, even if it cost him the relationship? If this spoke to you, like the video, subscribe for deeper psychological truths most men are never taught, and share this with a friend who needs to hear it right now.